This is the Matt Mosley Show.
It is the Matt Mosley Show, the E-Radio Network, and we are pleased to have the legendary coach, Gene Stallings, joining us now. And, Coach, you had a recent birthday. It was a great milestone. I want to congratulate you on that. That's very exciting. And if I'm, knowing you and the ranch you live on out there in Powderly, outside of, you grew up in Paris, obviously, or you were born in Paris. Have you been working the cattle this morning? Were you up doing some chores?
I worked in the garden a little while. I've got a lot of tomatoes growing in the garden, and I did a little hoeing around those. Okay,
you got some hoeing in this morning, and still blowing and going at age 90, which is an amazing thing. Coach, this time of year, do you ever find yourself thinking about spring football and thinking about those things you were doing in college? I guess obviously you were an NFL head coach as well, but do you remember spring football? Was this an exciting time of year for you in your coaching career?
Well, it was a time what I used spring practice for was find out who I wanted to be the starters in the fall year. You didn't do much in the spring except get ready to play in the fall. So I wanted to know who's going to be the starting quarterback, and starting wide receiver, and starting defensive backs when fall practice started.
And, I think a lot of people would want to hear, Coach, from you on, all this NIL and the portal and everything that's going on. Do you kind of find yourself glad that you coached when you did, and you don't have to do any of the all these guys going into the portal, getting paid huge amounts? Do you think you could have functioned in this current state of college football and college athletics?
Yes, I could function, but I wouldn't like it. First of all, we forget that you go to college for an education. You don't go to college to play football. And somewhere along the line, education has got to count something. And yet, if you can't play, you want to transfer.
Yeah, that is the way it is. And back in the day, you actually had quarterbacks who would wait their turn and probably were there, and then they would get to play their senior year. Now, in your coaching career, when you think back on your biggest influences, Coach Stallings, obviously coaching under and playing under Bear Bryant was a huge thing for you. Was that your biggest coaching influence over the years, or were there a couple of others?
I coached for Coach Landry for 14 years, and nobody was more knowledgeable about football than Coach Landry. He understood the offense, defense, kicking the game, where we were extremely afraid of Coach Bryant. And if he said do something, we did it without question. But as far as knowledge, nobody had as much knowledge about the game as Coach Landry did.
Did you ever get to the point where you could just kind of be friends with Coach Bryant, or was it always sort of like he was the? I mean, did he let down his guard sometimes? I guess is what I'm asking, or was there always no?
It never happened as long as I worked for him, and I worked for him for a long time. But we were scared to death of Coach Bryant. There's no question about that. Well, we appreciated Coach Landry. We were afraid of Coach Bryant.
Yeah. Well, a lot of us have read Junction Boys and know that story. And Coach, you're part of an amazing legacy. I think it's kind of like you and your friends that are still around. It's like you had to survive Coach Bryant, wasn't it? I mean, those. Do you have any favorite like Bear Bryant stories? That even going all the way back to your coaching for him or playing for him, what's your favorite Bear Bryant story?
Well, I guess my favorite was this was during spring practice, and we weren't playing very good. And the spring practice lasted the spring game was about an hour and a half, 2 hours long. And he said, "No, we're going to start over, and we're going to just not count anything that's gone from point A to point B. Spring practice, the final game's going to start right now." So we had a spring game for two years at one time.
You had a double spring game.
Yeah, it lasted a long time.
Oh my goodness! And I would imagine, Coach, by the time you were the head coach at A&M in the 1960s, maybe y'all were giving the players a few more water breaks. But when everybody was playing for Coach Bryant back in the day, there weren't a whole lot of water breaks, were there? And was that a time when
one and had about just a sip, and we had a trainer named Smokey, and Coach Bryant was going to give us a little water. Smokey gave us a whole cup full. Coach Bryant pitched a little fit, said, "I don't want them to have all that water." And I think he poured it out.
It's a wonder some of you guys made it, looking back and knowing now what we know. Isn't it amazing that we didn't lose more people back then?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But we were in great shape, and the only thing we had to do at Texas A&M at that time was play football. There wasn't any dating or anything else, and it was just football. And in fact, when we went to the summer and looking forward to the fall getting started, College Station never looked so good to us.
Talking to Gene Stallings on the Matt Mosley Show, E-Radio Network. And, Coach, it's just, I can't help but think about some of those players that you coached over the years, some of the recruiting that y'all did. I think back on some of the amazing plays. How excited are you now that, that had to be crazy for you when A&M and the University of Texas stopped playing for those years. Now that they're playing again, does that excite you and your family and all the Aggies in your life?
It really does.
Yeah.
I watch a football game every fall. I mean, every Saturday in the fall of the year, I still watch it. But the fact that we're back playing, that's exciting for me. A&M and Alabama, A&M and Texas ought to be playing.
Yeah, and you had the rare ability to say you coached at A&M, played at A&M, and then also head coach at Alabama. You won a national title there. I saw something you had been interviewed, Coach Stallings, about the transition from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer. We knew it was not going to be totally smooth because, as you've seen over the years, when you go from a legend, it doesn't matter who's coming in. There's going to be some bumps along the way. What have you seen with that Alabama program? Because again, a bumpy first year for Kalen DeBoer, but I'm sure you've visited with him. How do you think that transition is going?
Well, first of all, we haven't really had a long discussion about it. But I think that everything will work out in this fall. I think Alabama's going to be an improved football team.
Coach, when you first met Nick Saban, and I was thinking about that earlier today, you or Nick Saban, he finally retired before last season. Think about how long either you or Nick Saban were coaching. I mean, for you, it started back in the 1960s, obviously with Texas A&M, and then, of course, he started coaching probably in the 1970s. It's just kind of unbelievable how long either Coach Stallings or Coach Saban were coaching. Did Nick Saban, when you got to know him a little bit, because I know you went back to Alabama for those big games and A&M Alabama games, did he remind you of Coach Bryant, or was there anybody he reminded you of?
But nobody reminds me of Coach Bryant, with the exception of Coach Landry. I had the privilege of working for Coach Bryant in college football and Coach Landry in pro ball. And I felt like that was the best in the pros and best in the college. But to me, nobody would be equal to Coach Bryant in college football. Now, Coach Saban has done an outstanding job. There's no question about that. But the transfer portals and all that has made a big difference in college football.
Okay, and I was curious, you were talking about Coach Landry. When you got to Dallas in 1972, and you started coaching the Cowboys, you were coaching the secondary, how hard was that flex defense to learn? Was that a challenge? Were there a lot of things about it that you already felt pretty comfortable with? What was that transition like with that learning that famous Landry flex defense?
Well, you got to realize I was coaching in the secondary, and the flex defense had to do with the front seven. Had nothing to do with the secondary, except they had, if you're going to force with the left side linebacker or a cornerback, that affected what coverage you were going to be in. But the flex really affected the front five more so than it did the rest of us.
Okay, and then you would, I remember, of course, you get there, and Charlie Waters and Cliff Harris were in that secondary, and y'all would go on to have just some incredible teams along that 13-year period you were there. You know, I can't help but think of Cliff, because in our listening audience we have, he played college football in Arkadelphia, Ouachita Baptist. In fact, the stadium's now named after Cliff Harris. What do you remember about, and by the way, we're on in Hot Springs and Gurdon and Mountain Home all the way up to around Little Rock and Hot Springs. So it's a pretty amazing network we have in Arkansas. What do you, Coach, remember about Cliff and Charlie? Because I know them as like longtime best friends. They've worked together. But what was it like when you first started working with those guys?
Well, first of all, Cliff was extremely tough, and Charlie was extremely knowledgeable. Nobody that I've ever coached in the secondary understood it better than Charlie Waters. Nobody was as tough as Cliff Harris. So that's the legacy of both of them. Knowledge-wise, it went with Charlie Waters, and toughness with Cliff Harris.
Yeah, and he Crash, I believe they called him, and then Charlie, of course. What a pair. And I think they were doing, they got caught doing like dirt bike racing or whatever they were doing, motorcycle racing in the off season. They were kind of adrenaline junkies, and I'm sure you remember something about that. And then, of course, the Mad Bomber. Remember Clint Longley, that crazy story from 1975. And what was it, Coach? Was it Blaine Nye who had the famous comment about Clint Longley? It was the triumph of the uncluttered mind.
Right. I don't really remember exactly when it was or what it was, other than I do remember there was a controversy.
Yeah, well, he came in and won that unbelievable game in 74 on Thanksgiving against the Redskins, the team formerly known as the Redskins. But the controversy came later when he sucker punched Roger Staubach. And that was a large controversy, and that got him traded.
You did. It's sort of like Superman. You didn't bother his coat, his coat, and you didn't bother Roger Staubach. I had the privilege of coaching Roger, and I have never coached a guy that was more competitive than Roger Staubach was.
Yeah, he was. Gene Stallings joining the Matt Mosley Show on the E-Radio Network from his ranch out there in Powderly, Texas. And Coach, what is that? How many acres are on that ranch? And do you are you running some cattle out there? What all do you have going on out there?
Yeah, we have about 600 acres, and that's not big in Texas, but it's big in most parts of the country. But we raise cattle and grass. So if you've got good grass, you can raise good cattle. So it's important on a farm or ranch that you have good grass so your cows have something to eat.
Yeah, well, that is remarkable. I was so happy to hear about your birthday recently and catch up with you. And boy, people still always ask me how you're doing, and I even have the connection with you, Coach, that back in the late '60s or mid '60s, about '66. Y'all recruited my father. He ended up playing at Baylor, but I remember you telling. I heard about a story you told one time about you were trying to recruit somebody, and you told them, you were really, you were a religious man, and you had a lot of faith and everything, and somehow you told the story where the player that you were visiting with and all was so inspired by you that he told you that he was going to go to play at Baylor and become a pastor.
That's absolutely right. I can remember that happening. He was an outstanding football player, and he said, I made up my mind. I thought he was going to say he's going to come to A&M. He said, I'm going to go to Baylor and make a preacher. So I did that. I over-recruited him, I think.
Yeah, you may have. Now, listen, it's wonderful catching up with you. It's great to hear your voice. And Coach, one thing I'd be remiss if I didn't mention: your late son, John Mark, impacted so many people. And I was even reading in recent years where a community in Alabama, built a playground to honor him and honor special needs children. I would say maybe even more than your coaching and everything, your son, John Mark, and you've got these other unbelievable children as well, and you've got grandchildren, but John Mark had an amazing impact on you, your family, you and your wife, but really a lot of different families, didn't he?
He really did, and I've got a big picture of him right now, looking at him on my wall, and he was a real joy. When we found out we were going to have a child that had Down syndrome, I felt like it was going to be a disappointment to me. But my life wouldn't have been nearly as rich if it wasn't for the fact that we raised a child with special needs.
Yeah, and as you've said, he never complained, no matter what was going on. He always told you he was doing okay, and boy, what an amazing run he had.
Extremely sick. I say, Johnny, how do you feel? He said, I'm fine. Never complained about anything, and he was a real joy. And people that have a child with special needs, and they're extremely disappointed. But I'm telling you, my life wouldn't have been nearly as rich if it wasn't for the fact that we had the opportunity to raise Johnny.
Well, I tell you, it was an amazing thing, and in fact, you've written a great book on that I have up on my shelf right now, and what an incredible story. And in fact, I'm another season, a coach's story, and of course that's about raising John Mark. What an unbelievable book that is, and people can still find that out there at different places. But got a picture of you and your son, and that is a great thing. And boy, you remember even telling Coach Bryant the big news, as I recall reading that book and sharing that with Bear Bryant, and that's kind of an amazing thing, thinking back on it, all of those things. Well, listen, yeah.
It really was. My life has been a joy. I have no complaints about winning and losing and things of that nature, but the fact that I had the opportunity to raise Johnny just was a special time in my life.
Well, I appreciate you doing this. I always love hearing your voice. Boy, even you hit this great milestone. You still sound strong, and I love that you're out there gardening and doing whatever you need to do on the ranch. So you just keep doing it, and you got one milestone coming up here in about 10 years, Coach. So you might as well go for it.
I doubt very seriously if I can make 100, but I'm going to be going strong whenever my time is up. I want him to say he was a good man and he was an honest man, and I have no regrets on any of the things that I've done.
Coach Gene Stallings, you're a great example and a great inspiration to all of us. Thank you for doing this today on the E-Radio Network.
Listen, it's always a joy to be on your show, and you got to realize that, like I say, I'm 90. I'm doing the best I can, but I do start around from time to time.
You still sound great to me. There he goes, Coach Gene Stallings, joining the Matt Mosley Show on the E-Radio Network.
More Matt Mosley coming up.